I'm Ethan Mitchell, 32, and I've spent my whole life trying to earn my parents' approval. As a software developer with a six-figure salary, I thought I'd finally made them proud when I offered to pay off their mortgage. I never imagined my own parents would give away something I worked 7 years to pay off, handing over the keys to my sister's husband on their wedding day. But that betrayal was just the beginning. When they showed up at my cabin 6 months later with suitcases in hand, I realized it was time to finally stand up for myself. Before I tell you how I finally found my backbone, let me know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you've ever had to set boundaries with family who took you for granted. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Minneapolis, I always felt the weight of my parents' expectations. My dad, Richard, worked as an accountant at a small firm, and my mom, Karen, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. They weren't wealthy, but they were intensely focused on appearances and achievement. From an early age, I understood that good enough wasn't in my parents' vocabulary. A 95% on a math test would be met with, "What happened to the other 5%?" While a first-place science fair ribbon earned a brief nod and immediate questions about my next project. I threw myself into academics and later coding, hoping that eventually, something I accomplished would finally make them look at me the way they looked at my younger sister, Allison. Allison was 3 years younger than me and somehow exempt from the relentless pressure. Her B grades were celebrated, her participation trophies displayed prominently in the living room. When she decided to drop out of college to find herself, my parents called her brave. When I suggested taking a gap year before college to work on a startup idea, they shut it down immediately. "Don't throw away your future on fantasies, Ethan." After graduating with my computer science degree, I landed a job at a tech company that paid well above average for a recent graduate. While my friends were struggling with student loans and sharing apartments with 3 roommates, I was able to start building savings. My parents' reaction wasn't pride but expectation. "Of course you got the job. We didn't pay for all that education for nothing." Around my 25th birthday, my parents started having financial problems. The 2008 recession had hit them hard, and they'd taken out a second mortgage on the family home to cover some investments that didn't pan out. Dad was forced into early retirement when his firm downsized, and their debt was mounting. They didn't ask for help directly. That wasn't their style. Instead, there were pointed comments during Sunday dinners about rising property taxes and medical bills. The family home was a modest 4-bedroom colonial in a nice suburb. Nothing fancy, but filled with memories. I'd built a treehouse with Dad in the backyard maple tree. Mom had measured my and Allison's heights with pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe. It was the only stable thing in our lives. We'd never moved once during my childhood. When I saw the foreclosure notice accidentally left on the kitchen counter during a visit, I made what I thought was a wise proposition. I offered to take over their mortgage payments. In exchange, they would eventually leave the house to me in their will. They accepted immediately, seeming relieved. "You've always been so practical, Ethan," Mom said, patting my hand. "We raised you right." For the first time, I felt like I'd done something that truly impressed them. The arrangement made sense. I was single with disposable income, while Allison was still finding herself through a series of retail jobs and community college courses. The mortgage wasn't small, $1,850 monthly for the remaining balance of about $220,000. But my salary could handle it. I also started paying for repairs the aging house needed, a new roof, updated plumbing, kitchen renovations. All told, I was putting nearly $2,500 monthly into a house I didn't technically own yet. Around the same time, I decided to buy myself something special, a small cabin about 2 hours north of the city near Lake Superior. Nothing fancy, just 2 bedrooms and a great view of the water. It needed work, but I spent weekends fixing it up, creating my own private retreat. The cabin cost me almost all my savings as a down payment, but the mortgage was manageable alongside my other expenses. It became my sanctuary, the one place where I didn't feel judged. Allison met Marcus Reed when she was 26. He worked in pharmaceutical sales. or so he claimed. He drove a BMW, wore designer clothes, and had the kind of confidence that filled a room. My parents were instantly charmed. Where they questioned my every decision, they accepted Marcus's grandiose statements without hesitation. When he talked about his territory expanding and record sales, they nodded appreciatively. When I mentioned my promotion to senior developer, they changed the subject. During this time, I was putting in 60-hour weeks at my job. I had to maintain my performance to keep my salary and bonuses coming in. Between the 2 mortgages, the renovations, and helping my parents with occasional medical bills, my finances were stretched thin. But I managed. The promise of eventually owning my childhood home, of finally having earned my parents' appreciation, kept me going. My friend Tyler was the only one who saw the situation clearly. During a weekend at my cabin, he watched me calculate expenses while on what should have been a relaxing vacation. "Dude, do you have any legal documentation for this arrangement with your parents?" he asked. I admitted I didn't. "They're my parents, Tyler. We don't need paperwork between family." His expression was skeptical. "Family is exactly when you need everything in writing." I should have listened. The arrangement with my parents seemed straightforward at first. I would pay the remaining mortgage on their house, roughly $220,000 over the next 15 years. In return, they would leave the house to me in their will. They would continue living there, of course, but the financial burden would shift to me. We drafted a simple agreement on notebook paper. Nothing notarized or legally binding, just a record of our understanding signed by the 3 of us. In retrospect, that flimsy piece of paper symbolized how little they valued my contribution. "We don't need anything formal," Dad had said. "This is family, not business." Mom added, "We're so blessed to have such a responsible son. Allison is still figuring things out." That phrase, "Allison is still figuring things out," became a mantra in our family. It excused her from responsibility while placing more on my shoulders. At 26, she was working part-time at a boutique and taking occasional community college classes, living in a rent-subsidized apartment our parents helped her secure. Meanwhile, I was systematically transforming the family home. Beyond the mortgage payments, I invested in improvements. I replaced the drafty windows that had made Minnesota winters unbearable. I modernized the kitchen with new appliances and quartz countertops. I updated the bathroom plumbing that had given us trouble for years. Each improvement cost thousands, but I rationalized it as investing in my future home. My friend Tyler, who worked in real estate law, repeatedly urged me to formalize our arrangement. "At least get it notarized, man," he insisted during one of our fishing trips at the cabin. "Verbal agreements about real estate aren't worth the air they're made of." I dismissed his concerns. "You don't understand my parents. They're traditional. Their word means something." Tyler just shook his head. "It's not about trust, it's about clarity. People remember agreements differently." When Allison started dating Marcus, family dynamics shifted subtly. Marcus was 34 to Allison's 26, older, established in his career, and exuding the confidence that comes from family money. He claimed his pharmaceutical sales position had him on track for management, though details about his work remained vague. My parents were enchanted. Mom started inviting them for dinner every Sunday, preparing Marcus's favorite dishes. Dad found excuses to show Marcus his collection of vintage watches, something he never shared with me despite my expressed interest. During these dinners, I noticed Marcus studying the house with unusual intensity. He'd ask questions about the neighborhood property values and comment on the improvements I'd made. "That kitchen renovation must have cost a pretty penny," he remarked once. "Good investment though, kitchens sell houses." The comment struck me as odd. Why talk about selling a house that wasn't on the market? But I brushed it off. 6 months into their relationship, Marcus and Allison announced their engagement. My parents were ecstatic. Mom immediately began planning an elaborate wedding, far more extravagant than anything they'd ever done for my milestones. "We'll host the rehearsal dinner at the country club," she declared, despite their supposed financial difficulties. Marcus's family expects a certain standard. The wedding planning consumed our family for the next year. My contributions to the house continued, but were increasingly taken for granted. When I installed hardwood floors throughout the main level, a $12,000 expense, Mom merely commented that it would look lovely for the pre-wedding family photos. Meanwhile, Marcus's comments about the house grew more proprietary. During a family barbecue, I overheard him telling a friend, "We'll probably convert the upstairs study into a nursery eventually." When I questioned Allison about it later, she seemed confused. "Oh, he was probably just thinking long-term. You know how planners are." But something felt off. Marcus began suggesting dinner at their apartment instead of at our parents' house, giving him private time with Mom and Dad. Allison became evasive when I asked about their post-wedding living arrangements. "We haven't decided yet," she'd say vaguely. "Marcus has some ideas he's discussing with Mom and Dad." As the wedding approached, I found myself spending more time at my cabin. The family home, which I'd invested so much in, felt increasingly foreign. My parents had transformed my old bedroom into a wedding preparation room, filled with decorations, gift baskets, and Allison's belongings. The weekend before the wedding, I made the final payment on my parents' mortgage. 7 years of financial discipline had paid off. I brought the documents to Sunday dinner, expecting some acknowledgement of this milestone. "That's nice, honey," Mom said, barely glancing at the papers. "Now about the seating chart for the reception." That night, as I drove back to my apartment, I called Tyler. "The house is finally paid off," I told him. "Congratulations," he said. "Did you get the deed transferred to your name?" I hesitated. "Not yet. We'll handle that after the wedding. Everyone's too busy right now." His silence spoke volumes. "It'll be fine," I insisted, trying to convince myself more than him. The next day, I received a strange call from the family attorney, Mr. Peterson. He needed me to sign some documents before the wedding. When I asked what they were, he seemed confused. "Your parents said they discussed this with you. It's just some routine estate planning updates." Something in his tone made me uneasy, but with the wedding chaos, I didn't follow up. That would prove to be my biggest mistake. Allison and Marcus's wedding day arrived with perfect June weather, 75 degrees and clear blue skies. The ceremony was held at my parents' church, followed by a reception at the Lakeside Country Club. No expense had been spared. There were ice sculptures, a 7-piece band, and a 5-tier cake that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. I stood in the receiving line, uncomfortable in my rented tuxedo, shaking hands with guests I barely knew. Most were Marcus's business associates and my parents' friends. My own friends were limited to a table in the back. I'd been allowed only 10 invitations despite my significant financial contribution to the event. During dinner, I sat at the family table, watching my parents beam at Marcus as he charmed everyone with stories about his sales achievements and travel adventures. I'd just paid off their house, $220,000 plus roughly $80,000 in renovations over 7 years. Yet they seemed more impressed by Marcus's tale of closing a pharmaceutical deal in Colorado. After the main course, my father clinked his glass and stood for what I assumed would be a standard father of the bride speech. He began by praising Allison's beauty and kind heart, then turned to welcome Marcus to the family. "Marcus isn't just gaining a wife today," Dad said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's becoming a true son to Karen and me. And to show our commitment to your future together." My mother stood and handed Dad a small gift box, which he presented to the couple. My stomach tightened inexplicably. "Allison and Marcus, your mother and I want to give you something special to start your married life," Dad continued. "Something that represents our family's history and future." Marcus opened the box with theatrical slowness. Inside was a house key tied with white ribbon. My house key. To the home I'd spent 7 years paying for. "We're giving you our family home," Dad announced to gasps and applause from the guests. "Fully paid off, no mortgage, to help you start your family in the place where Allison grew up. The room erupted in cheers while I sat frozen, champagne glass halfway to my lips. This couldn't be happening. There must be some mistake. But then Marcus stood, his arm around Allison, both beaming. Richard, Karen, we're overwhelmed by your generosity. We promise to fill this home with grandchildren and beautiful memories. My father reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. And here's the deed, already transferred to your names. Our wedding gift to you both. The deed. To my house. The house that still had my furniture in it. The house with the kitchen I had renovated with my bonus money. The house that represented 7 years of financial sacrifice. I don't remember much of what happened next. I know I stood abruptly, knocking over my water glass. I remember my mother's sharp look of disapproval. I recall stumbling away from the table toward the exit, needing air, needing space, needing to make sense of what had just happened. Outside in the parking lot, Tyler found me sitting on the curb, head in my hands. What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. When I explained, his expression darkened. They did what? Without telling you? After you paid off their mortgage? They must have been planning this for months, I said numbly. That call from Mr. Peterson yesterday. He probably needed my signature to remove any claim I might have had. Tyler, ever the lawyer, immediately went into problem-solving mode. We need to look at that agreement you made. There might be legal recourse. It was on notebook paper, Tyler. We didn't even make copies. We were interrupted by my father's voice. Ethan! What's wrong with you? Get back inside. You're embarrassing your sister on her wedding day. I stood to face him. Dad, how could you give them the house? We had an agreement. I paid off your mortgage. I spent 7 years. He waved his hand dismissively. Don't be selfish. You have your cabin, and you make good money. Allison and Marcus need a place to start their family. But we agreed. We agreed the house would stay in the family, and it is. Besides, you're not married, no girlfriend, no prospects for grandchildren. What do you need a 4-bedroom house for? Each word felt like a physical blow. I'd been judged and found wanting, again. My single status, my childlessness, my supposed selfishness all lined up as evidence against me. You should be happy for your sister, Mom added, having joined us in the parking lot. Marcus has such potential. They'll need a solid foundation to build their future. And what about my future? I asked, my voice breaking. What about the money I invested? The renovations? The new roof? The floors? Mom's expression hardened. We raised you better than this, Ethan. Family helps family. Your sister needs this more than you do. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what I had always been to them, a resource. A reliable source of financial support and practical help. Not a son whose feelings and future mattered. Not a person whose sacrifices deserved acknowledgement. I have to go, I said finally. If you leave now, you'll hurt Allison deeply, Dad warned. But I was already walking to my car. For once, I couldn't make myself stay to keep the peace. For once, their disappointment in me felt less important than the crushing weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. I drove straight to my cabin that night, 3 hours in the dark with my thoughts spiraling. My phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls from family members, but I couldn't bear to read or answer them. Not yet. Not until I figured out how I felt, and what I would do next. As I unlocked the cabin door, the reality hit me. This small retreat was now my only home. The house I had invested in for 7 years, financially and emotionally, was gone. Given away without my consent, or even my knowledge. As I collapsed onto my sofa in the dark cabin, I wondered how I could have been so blind for so long. The week after the wedding passed in a blur. I called in sick to work, something I had never done before, and remained at my cabin, alternating between numbness and rage. My phone eventually died, and I didn't bother recharging it. The silence was preferable to the family messages that oscillated between guilt-tripping and gaslighting. When I finally plugged in my phone after 3 days, there were 47 missed calls and over 60 text messages. Most were from my parents and Allison, but some were from extended family members who'd been at the wedding. Reading through them made my stomach churn. "Mom, you're being childish. Come home so we can talk about this like adults." "Dad, your behavior at the wedding was inexcusable. You owe your sister an apology." "Allison, I don't understand why you're so upset. It's just a house. Can't you be happy for me?" "Aunt Linda, your parents are devastated by your reaction. After all they've done for you." Not one message acknowledged what had been done to me. Not one recognized the financial and emotional investment I'd lost. It was as if I existed in an alternate reality where 7 years of mortgage payments and renovations counted for nothing. Tyler drove up to check on me that weekend, bringing groceries and, more valuably, his legal perspective. "I've been looking into this," he said as we sat on the dock, watching the sunset over Lake Superior. "Without a formal contract, it's complicated. But since you have bank records of the payments and could potentially prove verbal agreement, there might be a case for promissory estoppel." "What's that mean in English?" I asked. "Basically, you relied on their promise to your detriment. You made those payments because you believed you would eventually own the house." "Can I get the house back?" Tyler hesitated. "Maybe, but it would mean suing your parents and sister. It would get ugly, expensive, and take years. And frankly, even if you won, would you want a house that came with that much baggage?" He was right. The thought of dragging this through court, of further fracturing what remained of our family relationship, made me feel ill. But the alternative, simply accepting this betrayal, seemed impossible too. "There's something else you should know," Tyler said, his expression grim. "I have a buddy who works at Morton Pharmaceuticals. He says they've never heard of Marcus Reed." "What do you mean?" "I mean either he works for a different pharmaceutical company, or he's lying about his job. And given his spending habits with no visible means of support." The implications were troubling. Had my sister married a con man? Had my parents given my house to someone who wasn't what he claimed to be? Over the next few weeks, I threw myself back into work, taking on extra projects to keep my mind occupied. I avoided family dinners and ignored the increasingly accusatory messages from my parents. I needed time to process, to rebuild my sense of self. The betrayal affected me in unexpected ways. I became hesitant in my other relationships, wondering if I was being used without realizing it. I scrutinized interactions with friends, looking for signs I'd missed with my family. My work performance suffered despite the extra hours. My boss noticed. "Everything okay, Ethan?" she asked during our weekly one-on-one. "You seem distracted." I gave her a sanitized version of events, expecting professional sympathy at best. Instead, her eyes widened in shock. "They did what? After you paid off their mortgage? That's not just unethical, it's financial abuse." Hearing someone else name it so plainly was validating. I wasn't overreacting. What had happened to me was objectively wrong. With my boss's encouragement, I finally contacted Jessica, a friend from college who specialized in family law. Her assessment aligned with Tyler's, though she had additional insights. "The verbal contract might be enforceable, especially with your payment records," she explained during our consultation. "But litigation would be expensive and emotionally draining. There's another angle though. Did your parents claim those mortgage payments as gifts on their taxes?" They hadn't. I'd never filed gift tax returns for the payments either, since we'd considered it an investment in my future property, not a gift. That could potentially create tax issues for them, Jessica noted. "Not that I'm suggesting you report them to the IRS, but it's leverage you might consider if negotiations become necessary." A month after the wedding, I finally agreed to meet Allison for coffee at a neutral location. She arrived looking stressed, her usual polished appearance slightly frayed at the edges. "You haven't been answering anyone's calls," she began accusingly. "I needed space to process being robbed by my own family," I replied, keeping my voice level despite the anger still simmering beneath the surface. That's not fair. Nobody robbed you. I paid off Mom and Dad's mortgage with the understanding that the house would eventually be mine. Instead, they gave it to you and Marcus without even discussing it with me. How is that not theft? Her eyes dropped to her coffee cup. They thought you'd be happy for us. You have your cabin, and we need space for the family we're planning. Did you know about this plan before the wedding? Her hesitation told me everything. You did know. You all discussed this behind my back, knowing I was still making payments on a house you planned to take. Marcus said it made more sense for us to have it, she said defensively. You're single, you make good money, you have your cabin. We're starting a family. And my 7 years of payments? The renovations? The new roof? The floors you're walking on that I paid for? She shifted uncomfortably. Marcus says those were gifts to Mom and Dad. Legally, they owned the house, so they could do what they wanted with it. Marcus says a lot of things, I replied. Like that he works for Morton Pharmaceuticals? Her head snapped up, eyes wide. What do you mean? They've never heard of him, Allison. Did you ever verify anything he told you about his job or his background? She left shortly after, clearly shaken. I didn't take pleasure in disturbing her newlywed bliss, but I couldn't stand by while my sister potentially fell victim to the same type of manipulation I'd experienced. 3 months passed with minimal contact with my family. I focused on healing, on rebuilding my financial security, and on reinforcing the sanctuary of my cabin. I installed a comprehensive security system, partly out of a new sense of caution, partly because having control over my space had become essential to my peace of mind. I was just beginning to feel like myself again when my parents showed up unannounced at my cabin one Saturday morning in October, suitcases in hand and expectant smiles on their faces. The second betrayal was about to begin. Surprise! Mom called out as I opened the door, still in my pajamas and clutching my morning coffee. She was standing on my porch with Dad, both surrounded by luggage, not overnight bags, but large suitcases and storage bins that suggested a longer stay. What's going on? I asked, making no move to let them in. 3 months of minimal contact had given me perspective and distance. I wasn't ready for whatever this was. We've sold the condo, Dad announced proudly, as if this was wonderful news. Closed yesterday. The market was too good to pass up. I blinked, trying to process this information. After giving away my house, the house I'd paid for, they had downsized to a 2-bedroom condo closer to their golf club. I'd learned this through Tyler, who'd kept tabs on family news for me. Congratulations, I said cautiously. But why are you here with suitcases? Mom laughed as if I'd said something charmingly naive. Well, we need somewhere to stay while we find our next place. The market's so hot for selling but terrible for buying. Could take months to find the right property. The audacity was breathtaking. They had given away the house I paid for, then sold their condo, and now expected to move into my sanctuary without even asking first. You're planning to stay here? At my cabin? I clarified, still blocking the doorway. Just temporarily, Dad said, already reaching for his bags as if the matter was settled. We figured it made sense. This place is too big for just one person anyway. Did it occur to you to ask me first? I asked, my voice tightening. Mom's smile faltered slightly. Ethan, don't be difficult. It's not like we're strangers. We're your parents. Yes, you are. The same parents who gave away the house I spent 7 years paying for without consulting me. The same parents who haven't acknowledged what they did or apologized once in the 3 months since. Dad's expression hardened. Are you still on about that? We thought you'd gotten over your little tantrum by now. Little tantrum? I repeated, feeling my carefully constructed calm beginning to crack. Is that what you call my reaction to losing over $300,000 in payments and renovations? You're exaggerating, Mom said dismissively. And after all we've done for you, raising you, putting you through college, which I paid back with interest when I covered your mortgage and renovated your house. I cut in. The house you gave to Marcus and Allison. Dad sighed heavily, using the put-upon expression that had cowed me since childhood. Look, we can discuss all this inside. It's cold out here, and these bags are heavy. No, I said, surprising even myself with the firmness in my voice. We're not discussing this inside because you're not staying here. Their expressions would have been comical if the situation weren't so painful, pure shock that their reliable, compliant son was refusing them anything. Don't be ridiculous, Dad sputtered. Where are we supposed to go? A hotel. An Airbnb. Wherever people normally stay when they sell their home without securing another one first. This isn't my problem to solve. Mom's eyes welled with tears, her go-to tactic when reason failed. How can you turn away your own parents? After everything we've sacrificed for you? For a moment, my resolve wavered. The programming ran deep. Their disappointment had always been my greatest fear. But then I remembered the moment at the wedding when they handed over the deed to my house without a second thought for what it would do to me. I'm sorry you're in this situation, I said, meaning it despite everything. But I can't help you right now. I need space, and I need to know my boundaries will be respected. Boundaries? Dad scoffed. We're family. There are no boundaries in family. And there it was, the fundamental belief that had allowed them to take me for granted all these years. In their worldview, family meant unrestricted access to resources, regardless of fairness or reciprocity. There are boundaries in healthy families, I countered. And I'm establishing mine now. You can't stay here. They left eventually, but not before unleashing a barrage of guilt and manipulation. I was ungrateful, selfish, vindictive. I was punishing them for doing what was best for the family. I was choosing things over people. Each accusation stung, but I held firm. I thought that was the end of it, but 2 days later, while I was at work, my security system alerted me to motion at my cabin. Checking the camera feed on my phone, I was stunned to see my parents again, this time using a key I didn't know they had to enter my home. They were carrying boxes and directing a delivery person with a mattress. I immediately left work and drove the 2 hours to my cabin, adrenaline and disbelief fueling me the entire way. When I arrived, they had already set up in my spare bedroom, unpacked their toiletries in my bathroom, and were arranging family photos on my mantel. What do you think you're doing? I demanded, standing in my own living room feeling like an intruder. Ethan! Mom said brightly, as if this was a pleasant surprise. We were going to call you once we got settled. We found your spare key in that fake rock by the back door. So clever. You need to leave, I said, my voice shaking with the effort to remain calm. Now. Today. This is breaking and entering. Don't be dramatic, Dad said. We're your parents, not burglars. I explicitly told you that you couldn't stay here. You ignored me and entered my home without permission using a key you took without asking. That's trespassing at minimum. We raised you better than this, Mom said, her voice hardening. After all we've done for you. Stop saying that, I finally snapped. What exactly have you done for me lately except take and take and take? You took the house I paid for. You took my renovations. You took my furniture. Now you're trying to take my cabin too? We're not taking it, Dad argued. We just need to stay here while we find a new place. A few months tops. And when Marcus and Allison decide they don't want you living with them after all? Was that the plan? They get my house, and I get stuck with you. Their expressions confirmed my suspicion. Marcus and Allison had indeed refused to let them move into the house after the wedding, despite earlier discussions suggesting they would share the space. They're newlyweds, Mom said defensively. They need their privacy. It's different with you since you're single. The double standard was so blatant it was almost laughable. My privacy and autonomy counted for nothing, while my sister's marriage was sacred ground. I want you out of my house in the next hour, I said firmly. If you're not gone by then, I'll call the sheriff and report trespassers. I'll also be changing all the locks and upgrading my security system. You wouldn't dare call the police on your own parents, Dad said, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. Try me, I replied, pulling out my phone. You've shown me exactly how much respect you have for me and my property. I'm simply responding accordingly. They left, taking their immediate belongings but leaving the mattress and some boxes, promising to return for them when you've calmed down and come to your senses. I hired a moving company the next day to deliver everything to a storage unit, paid for 1 month, and sent them the access information and a deadline to retrieve their items. That night, as I sat alone in my cabin, I felt a strange mixture of guilt, grief, and relief. Setting boundaries with my parents was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but also the most necessary. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up for myself without backing down, without letting their disappointment control me. My phone lit up with a text from Allison. We need to talk. Not about Mom and Dad. About Marcus. It seemed the second chapter of this family drama was just beginning. I met Allison at a coffee shop halfway between my cabin and the house that should have been mine. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail instead of her usual perfect styling. Marriage to Marcus clearly wasn't the fairy tale our parents had envisioned. Thanks for meeting me, she said, clutching her latte with both hands as if drawing warmth from it. I know you probably hate me right now. I don't hate you, I replied truthfully. I'm hurt and angry, but you're still my sister. She nodded, blinking back tears. What you said about Marcus not working for Morton Pharmaceuticals, you were right. He doesn't work there. He doesn't work anywhere. I let her talk without interruption. The story emerged in fragments. Marcus had been living on family money and credit cards, creating an illusion of success. His business trips were actually visits to casinos. He had significant gambling debts that he'd managed to hide during their courtship. Did you know about the house plan before the wedding? I asked when she finally paused. She looked down, shame evident in her posture. Yes. It was Marcus's idea initially. He found out you were paying the mortgage and suggested to Mom and Dad that since you had your cabin, we could use the house to start our family. They loved the idea. You know how much they adore him. And nobody thought to discuss this with me? The person actually paying for the house? Marcus said it would be better as a surprise. That you might make things complicated if you knew ahead of time. She winced at her own words. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I let myself believe it because it was convenient, and because Marcus can be very persuasive. Have you told Mom and Dad about his gambling? She shook her head. They wouldn't believe me. They think he walks on water. I realized then that Allison was as much a victim of our family's dysfunctional dynamics as I was, just in a different way. Where I had been taken for granted, she had been placed on a pedestal so high she couldn't possibly live up to it. Both positions were ultimately damaging. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know, she admitted. I'm trying to figure that out. But I wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong we all were to you. The house should have been yours. Her acknowledgement, while late, meant something. It was the first validation I'd received from any family member that my feelings were legitimate. The conversation with Allison was the catalyst for the next phase, a formal family meeting. I scheduled it at a restaurant, neutral territory where no one would have the home field advantage. I came prepared with documentation. Bank statements showing 7 years of mortgage payments, receipts for renovations, and the original handwritten agreement with my parents. My parents arrived with expressions suggesting they expected me to apologize for my overreaction about the cabin. Instead, they found themselves facing a changed son, one who had spent the past months in therapy, learning about family dynamics and boundary setting. I've asked you here because we need to address what happened, I began after we'd ordered. Not just the house, but the pattern of behavior it represents. Pattern of behavior? Dad repeated incredulously. You make it sound like we've done something wrong. You gave away a house I paid for without consulting me. You tried to move into my cabin without permission. Yes, something is wrong. What followed was one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I explained, calmly and with examples, how they had consistently favored Allison, dismissed my achievements, and treated me as a resource rather than a son with his own needs and feelings. Mom initially tried tears. Dad attempted authority. When those failed, they switched to denial. "We've always treated you and Allison exactly the same," Mom insisted. I placed the stack of mortgage receipts on the table. "Did Allison pay your mortgage for 7 years? That's different," Dad said. "She needed our help more than you did. And that justifies taking advantage of me?" "We didn't take advantage. Let me be very clear," I interrupted, surprising myself with my steadiness. "What you did was financial abuse. You used my desire for your approval to extract hundreds of thousands of dollars from me, then gave the asset I paid for to someone else without my knowledge or consent." The word abuse landed like a bomb at the table. My parents recoiled, genuinely shocked to hear their behavior characterized this way. "That's a terrible thing to say," Mom whispered. "We love you." "I believe you do," I acknowledged. "But love without respect isn't healthy. I'm setting boundaries now about how I'll allow myself to be treated, even by family." I outlined my terms: no more unannounced visits, no expectation of financial support, no access to my cabin without explicit invitation. If they wanted to rebuild our relationship, it would begin with an acknowledgement of what they had done and a sincere apology. "And if we don't agree to these terms?" Dad asked, making air quotes. "Then we'll have very limited contact going forward. I won't subject myself to further exploitation." They left without resolving anything, unwilling to accept my perspective or acknowledge harm. But standing my ground had changed something fundamental in me. For the first time, their disapproval didn't devastate me. I could live with it if necessary. The fallout was predictable. Extended family members called to express their shock at my mistreatment of my parents. Old family friends reached out to mediate the situation. Everyone had an opinion about how I should have handled things differently, been more understanding, more forgiving. I held firm. For each person who contacted me, I calmly explained my position once. If they continued to pressure me, I politely ended the conversation. Some relationships were permanently damaged. Others, surprisingly, improved once people understood the full story. Allison and I began rebuilding our relationship, though it remained complicated by her marriage to Marcus and her continued acceptance of our parents' favoritism. She at least acknowledged the unfairness of the house situation, though she made no offer to rectify it. 3 weeks after our confrontation, my mother called. "Your father and I have been talking," she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "We may have been insensitive about the house situation. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest they'd come to acknowledging wrongdoing. We've found a condo we like," she continued, "but we need a loan for the down payment. Since you've been so successful." "No," I said simply. "No? Just like that? We're your parents, Ethan." "Yes, you are. And I love you. But I won't be providing financial support anymore. That's one of my boundaries." She hung up without saying goodbye. 2 months later, they purchased a condo anyway, apparently having found another source of funds. I later learned they had borrowed against the house, my house, using its paid-off status to secure a home equity loan. Marcus had reluctantly agreed, his gambling debts making him desperate for cash. As painful as this period was, it marked the beginning of my true independence. I had always defined myself in relation to my family, the reliable son, the supportive brother, the financial safety net. Now I was learning who Ethan Mitchell was outside those roles. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The most unexpected consequence was the impact on my other relationships. Once I stopped accepting mistreatment from my family, I recognized similar patterns in friendships and romantic relationships. Some connections didn't survive my new boundaries. Others grew stronger, built on mutual respect rather than obligation or utility. By standing firm, I had lost the house but gained something far more valuable: self-respect, and the courage to define my own worth, independent of others' validation. It wasn't the lesson I'd expected to learn at 32, but it was perhaps the most important one of my life. A year has passed since that confrontation at the restaurant. So much has changed that sometimes I barely recognize my life, mostly in good ways. My relationship with my parents has evolved into something I never expected. After 6 months of minimal contact, during which I focused on my own healing through therapy and rebuilding my financial security, they reached out with what sounded, for the first time, like genuine remorse. "We've been doing some thinking," Dad said during a phone call that I almost didn't answer. "And some reading about family dynamics and patterns." It turned out that my aunt, Dad's sister, had finally intervened after watching the situation unfold. She'd experienced similar treatment from their parents and recognized the cycle repeating. She gave them books about family systems and emotional manipulation that had opened their eyes to behaviors they'd never questioned. "We didn't see what we were doing to you," Mom admitted during our first tentative lunch together. "We thought we were just parenting the way we'd been parented. But that doesn't make it right." Their apology wasn't perfect, and our relationship remains a work in progress. Old patterns emerge occasionally, requiring gentle but firm correction. But there's a new foundation of honesty that wasn't there before. We're building something healthier, though I maintain clear boundaries about financial entanglement. Some trust, once broken, can never be fully restored. As for Allison and Marcus, their story took a darker turn before improving. 3 months after our coffee shop conversation, Allison discovered Marcus had taken out additional loans against the house without her knowledge. The final straw came when she found evidence he'd been meeting with other women while supposedly on business trips. She filed for divorce 8 months after their wedding. The house, my house, became a battleground in their separation. Marcus wanted half its value despite the prenuptial agreement Allison had wisely insisted upon. The legal proceedings exposed his gambling debts and history of financial manipulation. In the midst of this chaos, Allison and I became closer than we'd been since childhood. Without our parents' comparative treatment driving a wedge between us, we rediscovered the friendship that had once defined our relationship. "I never realized how they set us against each other," she told me one evening as we sat on my cabin's deck, watching the sunset over the lake. "Making you the responsible one and me the special one. It hurt both of us differently." When her divorce was finalized, Allison made a decision that stunned me. She transferred half ownership of the house to me. "It should have been yours all along," she said, handing me the paperwork. "I can't give back the years or the money you put into it, but I can at least try to make it right." We now co-own the property, renting it out and splitting the income. The arrangement works because we've established clear boundaries and expectations, documented in a formal legal agreement. I've learned my lesson about handshake deals, even with family. My cabin has become my true home, a sanctuary I've further personalized and protected. The security system remains, not from fear of another invasion but as a symbol of my commitment to maintaining healthy boundaries. I've added a workshop where I build furniture on weekends, discovering a talent for craftsmanship I never knew I had. Professionally, I've thrived, earning a promotion to development team lead and mentoring younger programmers. My experience with setting boundaries has made me a better manager, able to create a supportive environment while maintaining appropriate expectations. My personal life has expanded as well. I've developed friendships based on mutual respect rather than utility. I've even started dating Jennifer, a wildlife biologist I met during a hiking trip. Our relationship is built on equal partnership and open communication, a refreshing change from my previous patterns of people-pleasing and conflict avoidance. Tyler remains my closest friend, his early warnings now a running joke between us. "Got that in writing?" he'll ask whenever I mention any agreement, no matter how trivial. We laugh, but the lesson stands: clarity prevents misunderstanding, even with those we trust most. The most profound change has been internal. I no longer measure my worth by others' approval or by what I can provide for them. I've learned that genuine love comes with respect for boundaries and recognition of personhood. It doesn't treat people as resources to be used or obligations to be fulfilled. I still struggle sometimes with guilt and the deeply ingrained need to please. Old programming doesn't disappear overnight, or even over a year. But I recognize these feelings now when they arise and can choose whether to act on them. If there's one lesson I could share from this experience, it's this: the most valuable property isn't the one with your name on the deed, it's the space you create within yourself for self-respect and authentic connection. Sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into, and that's okay. I'd never have chosen this painful path of betrayal and loss. But I can't deny that it led me to a better place than where I started. Not because of what was taken from me, but because of what I found within myself when everything else was stripped away, strength I didn't know I possessed, and worth that had nothing to do with what I could provide for others. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family? What helped you stay strong when guilt and old patterns tried to pull you back? Share your experience in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding strength in difficult situations. Remember, sometimes the most important boundaries are the ones that feel hardest to set. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage in your own.